Today I want to go through your first ever drum lesson. This isn't about learning beats, this is about what you need to know about drums and how to get everything correct and named and a little bit of music theory so you can start playing the rhythms. Let's get into it. What I've got here is an acoustic drum kit. So this is for anyone who literally has never sat at a drum kit or doesn't know anything about them. I teach a lot of beginners that have done exactly that, of all ages. So this is what I'm going to do, is take you through step by step. And in the series, as you can see on the website, there's a few videos or on YouTube going through stick control, foot control and bits and pieces. So this is basically your first ever drum lesson. This is what it would be like. As I say, this is the acoustic drum kit. Acoustic just means unamplified, so it doesn't need any amplification or speakers. It just makes the noise like an acoustic guitar or piano. The electric drum kit obviously needs headphones or an amp. I would always recommend to students to start with an electric drum kit, only because they're just so more accessible. They're not quite as much fun as these, and these are a bit more, I don't know, you feel more in touch or in tune, excuse the pun, to these drums rather than the electric. But the electric kit is just a great tool to learn how to play drums, and anything you learn on there can be put onto here. So I always recommend getting an electric drum kit. You can play it any time of the day, stick headphones on or put it speaker if your mates come round, and then just use it and learn on it. And it's a really good thing. Also online lessons, it's easier with the electric. I can do the acoustic, but electric's a little bit easier to control the volumes. The drumsticks, I've gone through how to hold them in previous videos, so check those out, and the same with the feet. So we're going to put our feet on. So we're just going to go through the drum voices. So each drum is what you might say an instrument on their own. So this is the snare drum. This has some wires underneath that gives it that snare drum sound. What happens is this is a throw off or a snare strainer, so that strains, so without the wires it just sounds like a regular drum. Put the wires on and there you have the snare drum. That's the main drum of the drum kit really. The snare drum is used probably the most. The bass drum or kick drum is also really important. That again is played with a pedal and your foot. And then the hi-hat, these are your cymbals. If you set them up, have them about 25 mil or an inch open, and you want to play it with your heel on the edge and push down. If you've got smaller feet, as I've described in foot control, you want to go a bit higher. There's exercises in the back of this book that I sell for using your hi-hat, so you can use it straight away anyway. But that's the hi-hat cymbals. Then we've got your rack toms. Now this is quite a big drum kit. A 5-piece drum kit normally comes with the snare, high tom, mid tom and low tom and bass drum, and that's what you call a 5-piece kit because it's got the 5 drums. The cymbals and everything else, or they're sometimes called breakables, anything that you can break down like your stool, sometimes called a throne, is what you call breakables or hardware. If you have a bigger drum kit like this, you then start to call them tom 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, just so that if you're in this sort of environment recording, you might want to adjust tom 2 or tom 3, you know exactly which one it is. But for the book's sake, we're doing the traditional snare, high tom, mid tom, low tom, bass, hi-hat, and that's hi-hat foot, keep things simple. Then you've got crashes, so this is a crash, makes a crash sound. This is a crash, and then you've got the ride, and it's called the ride because you ride on it. And then you sometimes play the bell. So if you're playing, you might come across cross stick or rim click. Again, that's kind of for a different sound, but just in case you come across that. Okay, so if you look here, these are how it's written. It's written on a stave. That's basically 5 parallel lines with 4 spaces in between. I use what's called a neutral clef because we don't use key signatures or bass clefs or anything like that. Years ago it used to be the bass clef that drum music was written on, but it's actually just 5 lines with 4 spaces and a neutral clef. You can see it here. And then what happens is you've got the bass at the bottom because it's at the bottom of the drums, hi-hat, foot, and then you've got your snare. Snares are always 3rd line up. Then the rack toms or high, mid and low toms do sometimes vary in different books, but I've written mine with most of the grade books. It's just the older versions of books that change seem to be. So they're kind of getting more formatted. But so there's your high tom, there's your mid tom, and there's your low tom. So they go down what's called in pitch. And then your cymbals, now if you buy an acoustic kit, sometimes it comes with just 1 cymbal and you can call that a crash ride. So you can crash it and use it as a ride. If you're lucky enough to get 2 cymbals, have the crash on your left side if you're right-handed and the ride on your right. If you're really lucky and you've got 2 crashes, have 2 crashes and a ride. That's how I do it. A lot of the electric kits are set for a ride there and a crash. The reason for that is basically if you're in a traditional drum kit, you might have a snare high tom and 2 low toms and the ride there. The reason being is that if you've got a 3-hour jazz gig, you don't want to be up here stretching. You want to be just relaxed and you have your ride really close here, and then you can get to your toms if you need to. Okay, so that's kind of the different setups, but I recommend you set up the snare, the high, the mid and the low with the bass and the hi-hat. And then when you play, you've just got to remember when you do get to rhythms that you're going across and you're playing so that you sit down, like I said before, on your seat, legs sloping, shin sloping, heel down. Drumsticks just arms by the side, come up, across, in the middle, fit perfectly. To your hi-hat, this one's pushed out because I record. I don't want the hi-hat spilling too much into the snare mic, so I've pushed mine out a bit, but generally you'd play so you're like that. Okay, so when you're playing, that kind of is comfortable. Some drum teachers teach out here, but again, I don't think you need to. What normally happens is people do that, but try and avoid it. Just keep to literally straight across. And that is really hard to do, believe it or not. Just having that position, it feels really awkward. It will come, so don't worry about it too much. Let's have a little look at the first one in the book. So number 1 is a whole note. Now with drummers, we don't often see whole notes because unlike other instruments, we can only really hold note if we're doing a drum roll, but generally we do, and crashes, unless they're choked, ring on. So we don't often see whole notes. We might see them at the end of the piece where we might need to ring a cymbal out. It's good to know all the notes anyway, so a whole note is basically worth 4 beats. Now the other thing to remember, if you had a different instrument like a piano, you'd hold the piano down 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's your whole note. Obviously drummers can't really hold notes, as I say. Let's try and hit that whole note. Now we can put the track on and then we can join in to the track. So this is number 1. And then keep going. So the drums drop out. And then that's it. So that's basically number 1. That's your whole note worth 4 beats. Second one is your half note, and that's worth 2. So what we're going to do is play along to this, wait for the 4 count. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. The drums have dropped out. Now we have your quarter note, which are your beats. So that's on 1, 2, 3 and 4. So we're going to play that now. Are you ready? Here we go. 2 more bars. So there's your quarter note. Now what we're going to do is do the quarter note on the bass drum. Here we go. After 4, here we go. Now we're going to do the hi-hat foot. If your foot aches, then just give it a rest, but hopefully you should be able to do 8 bars. It's quite tricky. Here we go. Then just with the click. Okay, now we're going to 8th notes. So 8th notes have basically 2 per quarter note. So it's 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. I'm going to do that on the snare. So counting 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Drums drop out. Okay, so there's your quarter notes. Now we're going to do 2 snares, 2 highs, 2 snares, 2 lows. Okay, ready? Okay, that's great. Now we're going to go around the drums. Here we go. Okay, wicked. So that's basically it. So when you're going around the drums, make sure they're nice and even strokes. You don't want to get into the habit of going, because once that starts, it's really hard to stop doing that. So you want to count in your head 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and that will really help. Now the next page, we won't do the lesson 4. This was just a taster, but the next page is basically using the bass drum with those drums or on the snare like number 9. And again, it's about lining your foot up with those, and that's where those coordination exercises come in. All right, but I hope this helps. So this gives you an idea to what the lessons are going to be like. Obviously we're going to get onto playing basic rhythms, but I always teach your basic theory of notes, your basic drums, before we get into doing the good stuff, because you want to get a foundation first. You want to understand what you're doing. There's no point having your dessert before your main. What we've got here is the bass drum. The rear head sometimes has a hole in it, and what you can do with that is, obviously like I have, you can use it for microphones, and the other thing it does, it lets some of the air out the drum. If you have a head that's got no holes, it does give a slightly different sound, but most drum heads have a hole in the back. The other thing you can do with that is, to stop this bass drum ringing, is you can put a pillow, a duvet, or any kind of blankets in there, and that just dampens it right down and gives it a bit more of a thud than a ringy sound. Again, you can get some products that help with that, but I'm quite happy just sticking a pillow in mine. because this stays here, it doesn't get moved around because you don't want it too heavy if you fill it with blankets. So just put one in, see how it sounds, and then you can always add to it. So there's your drum shell. This is the hoop. That is the head. Now that's called the batter head because you hit it. That underneath is called the resonant head or reso head. Everybody kind of gets that wrong. These are the lugs. These are the tension rods or tension bolts. Okay, so they tighten the drum hoop to the shell. It's got these microphones. Now, I've not used the mics and I've not mixed anything down because I wanted you to hear the drums as they are, because what happens is you get your drum kit home or you bought your drum kit and it doesn't sound anything like the record or a track or what you see on videos, and that's because it's been mixed and the sound's been compressed and you know, EQ'd, what's basically called mixing. I just kept it through the camera mic so you can actually hear what the drums sound like. They don't sound as good as what they would unless they've been mixed. Now, the other thing you can do on here, I've got these things. These are called dampening rings. All they do is they stop the drum ringing a tiny bit. So if you're buy a drum kit, especially cheaper ones, really ring. So you can put these on. You can get other products like Moon Gel, but I just prefer the rings because they're just enough for what I need. On the snare drum, on here, this is a little bit big for me, but this is basically a dampener as well. This is like pushes on the head to stop the snare, so I can adjust it how much I want to do that. And again, if your snare is making a racket, it could be that you need to tighten up the snare wires underneath using the adjustment, or it could be that you need some dampening. Okay, so that's just a few extra tips. Okay, well, I hope that helped. See you soon.